Welcome to Podcast on the Brink, your weekly dose of Indiana basketball news and discussion, brought to you by the Assembly Call and Inside the Hall. I'm your host, Jerod Morris. Join me live at assemblycall.com every Thursday night and immediately following every IU game for our live IU postgame show. And visit InsideTheHall.com for complete coverage of IU basketball and to join the discussion in the Inside the Hall Premium Forum.
Indiana basketball mini-series tickets are now available online at iuhoosiers.com. Both 5-game and 3-game packages are now available, featuring games against Louisiana Tech, South Dakota State, Arkansas, Northwestern, and Ohio State. Come check out your Indiana Hoosiers for these games over break inside beautiful Simon Scott Assembly Hall. You can visit iuhoosiers.com for more information. Go IU!
On this week's edition of Podcast on the Brink, Alex Bozich and I are joined by Bart Torvik of the eponymously named BartTorvik.com, one of the most trusted college basketball analytics websites out there. Bart is also a big Wisconsin fan, so just as we did in the offseason when we wanted to preview Wisconsin, we brought Bart on to get his thoughts on the Badgers. With the big Indiana-Wisconsin game coming up on Saturday, we wanted to bring Bart in, get his thoughts on this matchup, and also just his thoughts in general on how well the Big Ten is doing and Indiana's rapid rise up his rankings. You may recall Indiana was lower in the Torvik rankings than anywhere else, and the Hoosiers have almost cracked the top 25 after their 8-0 start. So we talk about all of that and more on this week's edition with Bart Torvik. Before we get to that, though, let's talk real quick about tickets. You know, with millions of live event tickets and a price match guarantee, SeatGeek is proving that there is a better way to sell tickets. You can search for sports, live music, comedy, and more. SeatGeek has the tickets that you're looking for, and they're all right there in one place. You know, it's an industry that tends to stagnate, not a whole lot of innovation, but SeatGeek stands out from the crowd because they do, and they've proven that there's a better way to do this. They built the fastest way to find tickets so you can stop searching for the perfect seat and start enjoying it. You know, if you want evidence of how SeatGeek is better than the rest, look at the App Store. They have over 50,000 five-star reviews, which shows how seriously they take customer satisfaction and how successful they are at delivering it. And it's because they provide a better process. SeatGeek pulls together millions of tickets from all over the web. They rate each deal on a scale of 1 to 10, and then they display it on an interactive seat map. So essentially, they break down the details. Green dots are good deals. Red dots are overpriced. This is especially helpful if you're looking for tickets in a venue that you haven't been to before, as I did recently when I bought Hamilton tickets for me and my wife. Really lets you know where you're getting the good value for your money. I have the SeatGeek app on my phone. It's by far the fastest and easiest way that I have found to buy tickets, and that's why I feel comfortable recommending them to you. And they will give you $10 off your first purchase. All you need to do is use the promo code BRINK, B-R-I-N-K. So download the SeatGeek app, use the promo code BRINK today for $10 off your first purchase. That's promo code BRINK for $10 off your first purchase. All right, here now is our conversation with Bart Torvik. Joined by Bart Torvik from BartTorvik.com. Talk about the Big Ten-ACC Challenge. But let's start, Bart, talking about this weekend's game on Saturday. Sure. Is there anything more reliable in your life besides the sun rising in the morning than Wisconsin beating Indiana at home?
No, it's one of those things you can just count on, you know, that things are still as ordered by God. So I'm very much expecting a win on Saturday.
Okay, and that leads into the question, because it does feel like, and you know, I say this hesitantly given the recent history, but it does feel like this is as good of a chance, at least when you kind of project the game, that Indiana has had to end the streak and to beat Wisconsin, simply because Indiana obviously 8-0, Wisconsin's dropped 4 games, feels a little bit shaky. You know, how do you kind of see that game playing out, and give us a little bit of insight on, you know, we see the record for Wisconsin and the lower computer numbers, but give us some insight into how they're playing.
Well, yeah, first, definitely it would seem like a good time for, I mean, I don't see how Wisconsin could possibly win. You guys should just put this one in the W column, you know, feel very good about it.
I see the reverse jinx that you're trying to do here.
I guess I'll start by talking about what's wrong with Wisconsin. And, you know, the easy answer is they're not shooting the ball well. Clearly, they need to be a team that shoots well this year. They don't have the inside presence that they've had the past few years. And I think they've made a concerted effort to be one of these teams that shoots a lot of threes, sort of a more modern game. That's what their offense is. But, if the ball doesn't go in, that doesn't really work. And that's been, that's at least the proximate cause, as we lawyers like to say, why aren't the balls going in might be a more difficult question. Maybe the guys just aren't that great at shooting, and that could be part of it. The looks, I'd say a lot of the looks are pretty good. They're missing open looks, pretty open looks. But some of them aren't, they're not playing a lot of inside to out kind of basketball as much as you would maybe hope. And I think as much as Greg Gard would hope, they aren't getting as many post touches. And I think part of that is Reuvers hasn't quite established himself as a post player yet. He's got some good moves down there, but he's still kind of, in my opinion, easy to kind of root out for good post players.
Sorry, Alex.
So yeah, he's getting the ball a little bit further away than maybe ideally he would be. So I think that's the problem with the offense. The defense before yesterday had been pretty solid. They despite shooting whatever it was, 4 for 90 in Brooklyn, they were in those games. So I think the defense, they can count on to still be kind of the solid Big Ten defense that you'd expect from Wisconsin. So, things haven't gone their way. I still think that they're a potentially bubble quality team. Whether they could still get back to the bubble, I don't know. But I think they'll win some games in the Big Ten for sure. Whether they'll win enough to get back in the conversation, I don't know. But they do need to win on Saturday. I think it's, at this point, almost a must-win game.
Bart, I'm still holding my shares of Nate Reuvers stock. However, prices have been plummeting recently. I don't want to sell low, but he started out pretty well. I know you mentioned his kind of inability to maybe kind of figure out things in the post. The other thing I'm noticing right now is just his 3-point shooting percentage is pretty bad. Down under 27%. He was 38 last year. What kind of just from the eye test and watching him has gone wrong recently? Because I know he did start out with a couple solid games to begin the season.
Yeah. I think his shooting hasn't been great lately, as nobody's shooting on the team has been. He's not getting a lot of great looks. I think he's still a little bit hesitant to consider himself as the guy that should be shooting the 3-pointer. If you have like a pick and roll and he gets a slightly open shot, he's hesitating, pump faking, and he's not quite good enough yet, at least, to really make anything of those. If he pump fakes and gets a guy in the air, a lot of times he'll just take one more dribble and then take a long 2 or something like that, which isn't great. Last night he had a great play where he pump fake, got a guy in the air, and ran in for a dunk. So that's kind of what you would hope he could do if he was going to be truly a dominant, or at least the alpha on Wisconsin. But really the big problem he's had is turnovers. He had a few last night, I know, and he's just turning the ball over too much. He's just not quite strong enough with the ball, and that goes into his problems in the post. So he's getting yanked for that. And I think he's pressing a little bit in the post. A lot of the turnovers are kind of just moving too fast, faster than he's really supposed to be moving in the post and that kind of thing. So hopefully those will get better. I think he's still learning to be the focal point of the offense. But at the conclusion at this point is that he's not quite there yet to be the main guy on a good team. So it kind of goes back to, he was supposed to redshirt his first year. He got forced into action. If you were looking at him as a Wisconsin sophomore, you'd feel pretty good about it. As a junior, his time is limited to make the leap.
How much, and I know this is a kind of a sore spot for Wisconsin fans and Greg Gard, but how much has the absence of Micah Potter hurt to this point, and has that affected kind of Reuvers in terms of just having maybe a bigger load than, especially when you're playing in these tournaments where you're playing 2 days in a row? I mean, that's especially on a guy that's kind of stepping into a new role. How much has that hurt? And has there been, is this issue in terms of from a Wisconsin standpoint, is it kind of blown over? Because I noticed, Guard talked about it a couple weeks ago, but it's basically a dead issue now that they realize that the waivers is fully denied.
Well, it's a dead issue in the sense that we know he's coming back December 21st. In fact, Jim Polzing just posted yesterday, I think the day before, that there was another appeal that was denied the other day. So they are still trying behind the scenes, but it's not going to happen. And at this point, it's only 2 more weeks or so anyhow. And maybe, we got these 2 Big Ten games, but then a couple of bye games. So how much of a problem is it? I think it's a big problem. I think he's by all accounts is going to be a starter and was always going to be a starter. Obviously it's a little bit of a convenient excuse. This guy it's not like he was a world beater at Ohio State. But the practice reports and the preseason inter-squad scrimmage, he kind of dominated. So there's high hopes for him, and they definitely are missing another big body. That's just a fact, that even if he's just kind of a replacement level Big Ten player, they need him because they're playing lineups with Aleem Ford at the 5, which is just untenable. They're playing a lot of really small lineups, which is not going to work in the Big Ten for sure. And against the better teams they've played, even a team like New Mexico, which has all this ex-Big Ten, top 100 talent, sort of refugees, it was really noticeable that they were just getting killed by these talented big guys in the front court on the boards. Like they're having Brevin Pritzel is having to be a rebounder, and so they miss his big body, even if he's not the answer on offense. The hope is that he is the answer on offense, or part of the answer. But it's a big potential hole, and they'll definitely be better when he's back, for sure.
We'll talk a little bit about Indiana, Bart. We had you on in the offseason, and we talked about how, Indiana was pretty low in your preseason rankings. They were down around the mid-50s, I think, and they've jumped up now to 26 with their 8-0 start. Obviously, probably a pretty big jump after that Florida State victory. Mm-hmm. What have your impressions been? So I don't know how much you've gotten to watch the Hoosiers, but what have your impressions been so far of Indiana?
Yeah, well, I really have only watched the Florida State game, most of that game. And so,
Devontae does that every game. Just so you know.
Yeah, he looked great. That was awesome. And then Trayce Jackson-Davis also looked really good to me as a freshman. He just seems to have the energy. There's something about him where he's just a player. It kind of reminded me of the first time I saw Thomas Bryant play for Indiana. Obviously they're not the same kind of player necessarily, but just like the first time I saw Thomas Bryant, like, oh, this guy's going to be a really good player. You could just tell. And that's what was my first impression of Trayce Jackson-Davis. So obviously they've been great. They've only really played one real losable game as far as I can tell, and they've played really well in it. But there's still the question of they haven't left Bloomington, and they're going to run into some adversity. How will they respond to that? So that'll be a really interesting game on Saturday. If they win that game against the Badgers, then it's kind of off to the races potentially.
Yeah. As you kind of look at that game, it's interesting because some of the strengths of Indiana really match up with Wisconsin's strengths. Like Indiana's really done a great job on the offensive glass, and one of Wisconsin's strengths this year has been their defensive rebounding. What are maybe in addition to 3-point shooting, which always is huge in any game, what are, a couple of the numbers that you think could really tell the tale of how that game goes on Saturday?
Yeah, I think you picked one there, the rebounding, and this goes back to really the Micah Potter situation, where that's a potential area where the Badgers can be exploited by a good team that has, good talent in the front court. In a way, the Badgers are kind of like a solid mid-major at this point with the size and the style that they play. And I've always observed that the way the Big Ten teams beat mid-majors in the non-conference is that they still miss a lot of shots, but they just get so many offensive rebounds that doesn't matter. So that could be a big key. The Badgers have to, play team defense, team rebounding. Their guards are going to have to rebound. And that could, other than assuming that both teams shoot, similarly, that could be the X factor.
Hey, I'm going to pop in here real quick because it is time to talk about Home Field Apparel. Our friends at Home Field Apparel, where they have made a name, established a reputation as the place to go for the most unique and comfortable Indiana apparel anywhere. I mean, if you haven't worn one of their t-shirts, worn one of their sweatshirts, it's probably hard for you to fathom just how comfortable they are. That's why you just need to get one in your hands, put it on your body, feel the comfort, the wonder of the material, and it stays comfortable even after you wash it, which is really special. So that's why you've heard me and other podcasters raving about the Bison logo sweatshirt. Yeah, the Bison logo is awesome. I mean, and that's one of the things Home Field does. They go to different schools, certainly did this with Indiana, and get all these old logos that haven't been used in a while and bring them back. And they're really cool, they're really unique. But then they put it on this material that's just phenomenal. So, I mean, yeah, people love that logo, and it's awesome, and it's a great conversation starter, but it's when you put the sweatshirt on and feel how comfortable it is that you're hooked, and you want to wear it all the time. So go to homefieldapparel.com, check them out. If you want to go directly to the IU collection, use the URL homefieldiu.com. A little bit easier to type in on your mobile device, homefieldiu.com. That'll take you right there where you can see all of the IU apparel that they have, and pay attention to this. Use the promo code CYBERBRINK, CYBERBRINK. That'll give you 30% off through Friday, December 6th. CyberBrink, their Black Friday deal ended for the public, but because you listen to Podcast on the Brink, you get this special extended Cyber Monday deal, so 30% off your entire order. CyberBrink, go to homefieldiu.com to check out the IU apparel. All right, back to our conversation with Bart Torvik.
Bart, the Big Ten won the challenge with the ACC, so I guess that should be a point of pride for Big Ten fans across the country. But I'm looking at your rankings now, and there's 6 Big Ten teams right now in the top 12. Early in the season, Jerod and I had a couple conversations on podcasts wondering if Indiana's non-conference schedule was going to be a detriment to if they were a bubble team. And now I'm looking at the Big Ten and thinking, there's going to be enough opportunities in conference play to pick up enough quality wins to get in the tournament. What have your impressions been of the league so far overall? Is it better than what you expected after the first couple weeks, or is it kind of on par with maybe what you thought in the off season?
Well, it's different for sure. It's hard to say if it's better or worse. It's definitely better at the top. Ohio State is better, I think, than anybody, at least so far, thought they would be. Maryland is has been as good as the Maryland, supporters thought they would be. Michigan definitely better than what we thought they would be. So those teams have really overachieved, and that's really good because that gives a team like Indiana a chance to get some quadrant 1 wins at home. If they play those teams at home. Michigan State has obviously been a disappointment. I don't think anybody's worried about them missing the tournament or anything. And they're still obviously top 10 based on KenPom and my site based on preseason projections. And so they'll probably still end up being a chance for a quadrant 1 win at home for most people. Penn State is another team that I think the judgment is still out on them. They're definitely, for the most part, taking care of business and looking like a really good team against lesser teams, other than Yale, which they needed a massive comeback to beat. And then they had their only loss was just an epic collapse against Mississippi, which they really should have won that game, so they could be undefeated. So basically, they're looking like, I think a lot of people were skeptical of them being a tournament team coming into the year. At this point, I think, maybe top 20 or whatever I have them at is probably too high, but I think they definitely look like a solid tournament team. And then Indiana, obviously, as we discussed, has done everything you could ask of them. So then it really comes down to the bottom half of the league. You got those top 7 teams, I think, that right now are pretty safe bets to make the tournament. But is there an 8th team beyond Indiana and Penn State, if you're assuming that they're tournament teams? That's the question. In Iowa, they've got a couple nice wins. I still don't know how good they are. Obviously, at one point when they got destroyed by DePaul, you kind of figured that they weren't going to be that good, but now DePaul is 9-0 or something. And so maybe Iowa is kind of a sneaky team to get into the tournament. Illinois is the other team that I still don't really know what to make of. They've got potential, I think, but there's still just the basic questions of their scheme, basically their coaching, whether it'll work. And, in that game against Miami where they just got run out of the gym in the first half, I think most people would say, okay, this season's over, but then they make this gigantic comeback and have a ball down one with a chance to win. So which team is the real Illinois? That'll be an interesting thing to keep an eye on. The one thing I'll say about Illinois is that I think the basis for really high optimism on them was that Io would be a kind of a stud as a sophomore, and so far that's not the case. He's a good player, but he's not a guy who you're thinking of as doesn't look like a lottery pick necessarily. On the other hand, Kofi Coburn does look like that, so that's kind of kept them from falling too far. And then the bottom of the league hasn't really shined. Nebraska has been as bad as you could possibly have imagined. I think that when we talked this summer, they were definitely a mystery team because none of their players had ever played a Big Ten game before, I believe. So you thought, well, maybe they'll actually be good, but no, they've been really bad, and it looks like they're just going to be bad all year. So I guess you worry a little bit. It's still a nice arena, and presumably the Nebraskans are still going to show up and cheer. So you could see them winning a few games, getting a few upsets, but they're definitely going to be bad. And Rutgers is the other team that I was a little bit high on. And some people, they've had a nice charted a nice course the last few years. But it does seem like they're going to be stung by the loss of Amuri, and kind of maybe be stuck where they were last year, which is a team that's good enough to win some games in the Big Ten, but that's not a contender to make the tournament.
By the way, that banging that you hear is other college basketball analysts trying to break into Bart's office and steal his formulas.
The vault.
Yeah,
my formulas are here, undisclosed location.
All written on scrap paper, just locked in the safe.
That's too true. Yes.
Bart, one question I get a lot, and this time of year specifically, and I'm seeing a lot of things on Twitter about this, and as someone who likes to cite your numbers and Ken Palm's numbers, people are saying, well, how is Michigan State still number 4 in Ken Palm, and how is Michigan State still number 8 in your rankings? And I try to explain to people that with any computer ranking, you have to have a baseline from a previous season or previous data to kind of formulate things, and then eventually I think kind of that drops off at some point. Can you kind of explain at a high level without giving us too many details, but just how does that work, and why is it that a team like Michigan State is still in the top 10 in both yours and Ken Palm's rankings?
Sure. Yeah, I mean, you're right. The basic reason is that in order to get any kind of reasonable predictions in the first month or two of the year, you need to have a preseason baseline. And so I have one, Ken Palm has one, and that phases out over time. For mine, it's a linear phase out. In other words, every game that's played replaces one game of the preseason projections, which start out as counting for 13 games. And then every game that's played just gets phased out, more or less. Some games don't count as a full game just because mismatches don't count as a full game. So usually after 15 games or so, it's completely gone. But that means right now it's still, for most teams, it's about half of their rating is the preseason rating. And so that's the basic answer for why Michigan State is still in the top 10, Ken Palm and my site and other similar sites. The other thing is, they've performed poorly in some high profile games, but overall, it's not like they've been terrible. They've got a really nice road win over Seton Hall. And you can do some of my site, just kind of look at this year, look at the ratings as they would be if you took out the preseason rating. and Michigan State would be 33rd in that. So, and I think some people just kind of think, well, they lost by 12 or whatever to Duke, or maybe it was more, so they suck, and that's not the way rating systems work. It's just one game. There's a lot of variance in every game, so you're not going to overvalue just one game. And I think it would be foolish to just predict the next few games based on the idea that Michigan State is the 33rd best team in the country. It could be, it could be that just everybody was wrong about them, and that all these returning guys somehow got worse, or just don't work well together anymore. But it's more than likely that they're going to be a top 20 team at least, and pretty likely that they're going to be a top 10 team.
When did you start your site, Bart?
I started, I think, for the 2015 season was the first year that I had it on a site rather than just blogging about this stuff. Yeah.
Have you noticed a lot more traffic, a lot more activity? Because I know I'm noticing. I just noticed recently. I was listening to the Ion College Basketball podcast, and they use a lot of advanced analytics on there. And I'll hear Matt Norlander just using Torvik for shorthand now, and kind of throwing your numbers in there with Ken Pomeroy. So it feels like you've reached kind of this next level where kind of felt like it was like this little secret that some of us had found, and now it feels more widespread. Are you seeing that just in traffic numbers and mentions and all that kind of stuff?
Yeah, I think that's true. It's a little embarrassing, to be honest, but maybe that's just the Midwesterner in me. Obviously I'm a big Ken Pom fan, and so I still use Ken Pom's site all the time, and it bugs me when people are like, I don't pay for Ken Pom anymore because I just use Bart Torvik's site, and I really want to discourage people from doing that because, like, if Ken Pom, I don't consider myself a competitor to Ken Pom, just sort of another gloss on it. And if Ken Pom starts suffering because of my site, he'll probably just shut it off, But yes, the traffic is increasing, and it's definitely getting more mentions, Matt Norlander in particular, which is fun. And cool.
Well, it's awesome. And you've got a lot of really cool, fun stuff on there. So we recommend it to people every chance we get. Do you, one of the things that seems to be becoming clear as we go through these first few weeks of the college basketball season is that there's no dominant team. And really, it doesn't feel like there's like a dominant set of teams even at the top, really. I mean, we're seeing that with how much turnover there is at number one. And, you look at the top right now, Ohio State, Louisville, Kansas, 1, 2, 3. And those teams, Purdue number 4, and those teams all have great wins. They're all really good, potentially great teams, but none of them feel like a dominant, like this is obviously a Final Four team right now. I guess, how do you view that? And is there any metric or any way to quantify, like the power at the top or how wide open a season is? Because it feels like this is as wide open as there's been in a long time.
I definitely agree with that take. And, I think I tweeted out a couple weeks ago, I think that it just feels like a year where there's going to be 2 8 seeds in the Final Four, and that's kind of where I was coming from on that. I think it's too early to numerically quantify that because there are still some teams, like Ohio State and Louisville are having great seasons. So if you look back at past years, I'm sure that their numbers are similar to the best teams from recent years. It is a little weird to see like Purdue at 3 losses at number 4 and Michigan State with 3 losses, or wherever Purdue is, and Michigan State with 3 losses in the top 10. I bet that's pretty unusual. Just the raw number of losses that some of these top teams have. So maybe that would be a way to take a look at it. It wouldn't surprise me if most years at this time, the top 10 teams in Ken Pom have on average less than 1 loss or something like that. So I definitely agree with that take, and it'll be interesting to see how it goes. Like Ohio State, who's up there number 1, number 2 in these systems. I guess it comes down to, it just doesn't feel like Ohio State is the best team in the country. And maybe that's wrong in the end, but it doesn't feel that way. So I think they're going to lose some games in the Big Ten, probably maybe 5 or 6, even if they are the best team. So it's just going to be a brutal, bloody battle. It seems like all year for everybody.
It does. You mentioned Purdue, and this is the second straight year where, it feels like, they're losing these games in the non-conference, but the computer rankings seem to love them. Like last year, I remember they had like 5-6 losses early, and it's almost like there was just a floor on how far they could go. And I know part of that early in the season is what's baked in from the previous season. But and look, the computer rankings ended up being right because they made the Final Four and they were really good, by the end of the year. What is it, if anything, about their style of play that the advanced analytics seem to like? And just in general, is there like a particular style of play that the advanced stats seem to like over others, like all else being equal?
In general, I don't think that there really is anything about style of play that matters. I think there's a potential minor advantage to slower paced teams, just because it seems like it's easier to, if you're dividing everything up into possessions, to have a massive outlier game at smaller possessions against like lesser teams on a per possession basis rather than raw numbers. It seems like you get to a 40-point lead, and that's kind of an equilibrium that hardly anybody ever gets past. But if it's a 50 possession game, that's going to count a little more than if that's an 80 possession game. Now, my system and KenPom's system and every good system has ways to kind of de-emphasize those results as long as they're a mismatch anyhow. So overall, I don't really think it has anything to do with style of play. Both this year and last year for Purdue in particular, it's been that their losses are close against good teams, and then they take care of business against the bad teams for the most part, whip them, and then they get some big wins. Like this 29-point win over Virginia is just there's no good. It's just going to be super valuable in my system and any similar system. I think there's just no way to discount that kind of game. So that was just a huge win that's going to stick with them for quite a while and bump them up. Last year, actually, at least in my system, their preseason ranking, I don't think was that great. I think they were in the 30s. Last year was kind of a weird thing where they really were just playing these tight games and losing them. And then also winning big in their other games. And so, the system is it's not as binary as we humans tend to be about win and loss, kind of more qualitative, and says, well, that's actually a decent result to lose by 2 to, Texas on the road or whatever it is. And usually, the reason it is that way is because that there's information there, and it's usually helpful in making the predictions. And last year in Purdue, it worked out. In fact, the favorite comment I ever got on my website, on my blog, was about somebody complaining about the ranking of Purdue when they were 6-5. And so I've kind of got that one framed, because I don't, they basically didn't lose again after that day, and that this person made that comment just saying the ratings are trash because look at Purdue at 6-5. And this year was a little bit of a different story because Purdue was highly rated in my preseason projections and KenPom's, I think. And I think most people thought they were too high, and maybe they're right, but I guess they were 8th in my preseason rankings, which is, they're losing a lot. They're losing a really, really special player and replacing him with No-Gel Eastern, basically, who is, kind of a weird kind of player. There's a lot to like about him, but
he's 0 for 6 from the free throw line this year, I think.
Right. And, it's just painful to watch him shoot free throws and just to shoot in general. And that's just hard to imagine how that guy could be a focal point of an offense. And he's not, obviously, but he's a really great defensive player. And they're making up for it in other ways. So this year, the preseason rating is definitely part of it, but now they've actually overall outperformed their preseason rating by virtue of just destroying Virginia.
You may have noticed that I said that Purdue made the Final Four. That was just an act of verbal charity on my part. We know Purdue will never make a Final Four, so I figure small consolation. You can make a hypothetical Final Four here on Podcast on the Brink, Boilermakers. Alex, did you want to jump in?
So close,
Yeah,
so close.
Yeah, so close.
That ball was rolling towards midcourt.
Yes. I just want to ask Bart, one of the things that's upcoming, I think, sorry, as my dog barks in the background, there must be a Wisconsin fan outside or something. Monday, December 16th, I believe, is the initial release of the net ratings for this year. I believe it's pushed back a couple weeks. Do you have any insight on? I know that David Warlock, who handles, I think, the media for the NCAA, had tweeted that I guess that they wanted to get a couple more weeks of data after kind of last year's release and a lot of complaints. I mean, is that a reasonable explanation? And now that we're, I think, in the second year of this, have you gained any more insight as to what this rating system actually is, and is it something that you think is going to continue to improve and be helpful as time goes along here?
Yeah, I think it is reasonable to release it a couple weeks later, and I believe their explanation. I don't think there's any hidden motives behind that. They took some flack releasing them when they did last year, because at that point in the season, it was just too early to have a really good rating system that didn't include preseason prior. And that's why, Ken Palm and my site included preseason prior, because you can get just kind of ridiculous results like Loyola Marymount or whoever it was in the top 10 if you don't have it. So it's reasonable. I personally would still like to see them early, just because it gives you more of an insight into what's making them tick. Because as the season went on last year, they really converged with efficiency ratings. It really does seem like it's, at least in what comes out of it is very similar to Ken Palm, and that's good, I think, because that really is based on how they use it. That's what I want. They use it primarily to judge your wins and losses, not necessarily to judge your team by the number next to it, but to judge your opponents by the numbers next to them. And the problem with using the RPI is the RPI just so frequently mischaracterized teams that it wasn't very good for that. You could just if you're going to categorize wins, you want to know how good those teams actually are. And the best way that we know to judge teams is efficiency type power ratings or other type of power ratings. So it's definitely some kind of power rating, and that's good enough. I think that they could still improve how they use it to be more fine-tuned rather than making these big buckets. You could go to the sort of wins above bubble or strength of record. I think is ultimately the best way to judge a team's resume, if that's how you're gonna select teams based on resume, which does make sense, at least partially. Then there's more sophisticated ways to do it, and maybe they'll move towards that. But the net rating as an actual way of ranking teams seems to be pretty good. But we don't have any data this year, so I haven't gained any additional insight yet.
Bart, let's end with a little bit of trivia, as we mentioned off the top, and as IU fans know all too well. It's been a long time since Indiana has won at Wisconsin. In fact, the last time it happened was 1998. This was pre-Kohl Center. So a little bit of...
It was the first season of the Kohl Center, actually. Sorry to interrupt.
Oh,
8 days after the Kohl Center opened is what
yeah, because I had season tickets that year, so it was partially in the field house, partially in the Kohl Center.
Nice. Do you remember who the coach was of Wisconsin that season?
That would be Dick Bennett.
Dick Bennett. And do you remember what Wisconsin's record was that year?
I do not remember exactly the record, but I do know it was a bad year.
It was a bad year, yes. Wisconsin went 12-19, 3-13 in Big Ten play. Who was Wisconsin's leading scorer that year?
I want to say Sean Mason.
Yes, Sean Mason was top. Sean Doherty was second. Dwayne from Bloomington was right on that Wisconsin team. And do you recall any of the players from Indiana's team in that season? It was an unspectacular season for Indiana. They finished 20-12, 9-7. It was kind of one of those just, blah seasons at the end of the Bob Knight era.
Yeah, all I remember is Bob Knight.
That was AJ Guyton was a sophomore that year with 16.8 points. Luke Recker 12.8. Andre Patterson. So it was that group. So we will. It's been a long time. It has been a long time. Saturday, as we mentioned, it feels like an opportunity for Indiana, but I think one of those things we all want to see it before we'll believe it. But
yeah, to me,
you can't
honestly,
predict it to happen at this point.
Yeah. I would be really worried if I were in your shoes. And this is legit, not sarcastic, just because it seems like one of those games early in the season where a team has done everything they're supposed to do at home. Their first road game is always a big deal. I think we kind of saw that with Michigan going to Louisville. I felt very confident that Michigan was going to lose that game just because they're flying high, and then you get a little dose of reality. So that's my belief and also my hope, obviously. But so I think it'll be a real impressive win to me if Indiana wins it.
Yeah, no, I agree with that. That's one reason I'm a little nervous about it. And the other reason I'm a little nervous is that, as you said, Wisconsin hasn't shot well. But these, Demetric Trayce, Brad Davis, and they have track records of being pretty good shooters. And, Indiana has defended the three-point line okay from a percentage basis. But, we still give up more than 40% of shot attempts from three and are prone to, giving up hot shooting nights at times to other teams, even though I think that's overblown some, but it kind of feels like there might be a correction or a little regression to the mean coming for Wisconsin from a shooting perspective. So that could be telling too. So I agree. I mean, look, given the history, there's always lots of reasons to believe Indiana is going to lose this game. But with the way they played against Florida State, I think that obviously gives Indiana fans legit reason to think they could go on the road and do it. So it'll be fun to see what actually happens.
Yep, for sure. So,
cool. Well, Bart, thanks for your insight. We always appreciate it.
Thanks for having me on.
Alex, hopefully Nate Reuvers picks things up for you and those, your stock portfolio doesn't lose too much more value.
It's 30 and 10 on Saturday.
It's too low right now to sell, so I'm holding at least through the month of December, and then if I have to sell off early in 2020, I need to figure out someone else to buy low.
I hope you've diversified with some Trayce Jackson-Davis stock because the price is going high. He's number 10 in the Bart Torvik Player of the Year rankings right now.
That's right.
Cool. Well, Bart, thanks as always. We'll be following along on Twitter during the game and all throughout the season, and we always appreciate you coming on and sharing your insight with us.
Yeah.
Thanks, Bart.
Thanks, guys. Take care.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Podcast on the Brink. We always appreciate you being here. Remember to join me and my co-hosts for more IU basketball talk at assemblycall.com and visit Alex over at insidethehall.com for complete coverage of Indiana basketball. If you want to support Podcast on the Brink, here is the single best way to do it. Tell anyone you know who loves IU hoops about us and suggest that they subscribe. Podcast on the Brink can be found on Apple Podcasts, Google Podcasts, Spotify, and everywhere else podcasts are available. Tell your social media followers, email your friends, text your family members. For weekly discussion about IU basketball, they need to be subscribed to Podcast on the Brink. We'll talk to you next time. Go Hoosiers.